Hello, welcome to the Motorsport Review. I am your host, Perry Brown, and joining me this week is an Australian Grand Prix veteran. He's another McLaren fan, I'm afraid. I seem to have surrounded myself with McLaren fans, so there'll be a little bit of bias towards them, I'm sure, and a little bit of Brit bias, but my guest is Andy Donnelly. Welcome, Andy. How are you?
I'm good, Perry. Thank you very much. Very nice intro. You make me sound like I've actually driven the Australian Grand Prix a lot of times. I'm certainly a veteran, but yeah, I've been to the Australian Grand Prix about 5 times, and yeah, it's been good. It's one of my favourite races to go to, especially when it's at the start of the season. I think there's a special atmosphere about it when it's at the start of the season, and what I would say as well is that the Aussies always get behind all the drivers. It's very good.
Yeah, me and Keith said as much last week. We said it just feels right that the first race of the season be at Australia. And I know Bahrain do such a good job of hosting Formula One, but yeah, it just feels right, doesn't it? Although 3:30 alarm clock, not quite so right, but we can deal with it once or twice a season, can't we? And
Exactly.
yeah, a huge amount of respect for Australians and anyone else in time zones, which they have to adjust their schedules massively for the rest of the year. So we'll let them have one race where it's at a reasonable time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so there's certainly one thing that you always used to hear from Aussie fans when you're over there is like, yeah, this is our one race we get to go to at a regular time and can watch and have a beer. Every other time you've got to be up early, up late. So even some of the races that you think would suit Australian times, it's early mornings for them or late evenings and stuff like that. So yeah, and they put on such a good.
I think what's worse for them as well is we adjust our Sunday, so we have to get up, as I say, like 3:30 in the morning on a Sunday, and then the rest of the day you're a bit drowsy, but it's a Sunday. The key thing here is that Australians typically have to get up 3 a.m. on a Monday.
Yes.
Right, and sort of debate: are they going to get a couple of hours after the race, go to work, not watch the race, and have to go to work? And this, and again, as we say, this is like 17 times a year. So, yeah, I've got nothing but respect for them for keeping up with any sport. If they're watching on a European calendar and trying to keep up with the time zone, absolute respect to them for that. So, as I say, you've been there 5 times
Yes.
to Australia. I mean, whereabouts have you seen the racing from? I'm guessing you've tried various different stands, different areas racing from.
So we've done a few different sort of approaches to it. The first, we've sat in the last corner and we've watched from there, and you get a pretty decent view down the straight and down the pit lane. And you know, that was pretty good. We've also sat in the first corner stand, and I was expecting a really good view of the actual starting grid, but there was a tree in my way. You got a great view of that sort of like the first sort of chicane, and then the next one as well. So you got a decent view of that. But by far, probably the best ticket we ever bought was I think it was the year after Danny Ricciardo had first debuted it in the Aussie Grand Prix for Red Bull. And if you bought your tickets the week after, they did a general admission ticket, 2 for 1 price, right? And it basically worked out for a whole weekend ticket, $50 each. But you had to buy 2 tickets, so it was $100. You know, general admission. And you could go around. They had bleachers all around the outside and stuff like that. And we stood in a few bleachers in different places and things like that. You got a really decent view, and you could watch the race from anyway. One of the best bits for me is I went down that back straight, and they were flying past there, and that was great. So yeah, there's plenty of places to watch, and it's a massive. Obviously we all know it's in Albert Park, but Albert Park is pretty damn big, and it's not just the racing that they have on there. They have other events on there as well and other bits and pieces. Not quite like the Singapore level where there's music and bands. There's a few things on, but you've got you know, the usual fan village. Then you've got other areas. What they had in one place was like a load of beanbags sat out, so you could watch a big screen and watch the V8s go around. And honestly, the Aussie V8s were worth the watch as well. They were really good fun to watch. It took no prisoners. So yeah, sorry, I nearly swore there, but I'm not sure if it's that kind of podcast.
Neither am I yet, actually. Yeah, if the FIA watch you, there's a 40 grand fine, I think, if you talk
Is
about
it?
F1 and swear. But we'll move swiftly on from swearing. Yeah, I was going to mention the V8 supercars because what a support bill. You've got Formula 2, Formula 3, and Formula 1, and then the V8 supercars, which I'm sure at some point I'll be covering on this podcast, and I'll have to bring you back on for those when we do, because yeah, they're some machines, aren't they? Those they're not touring cars at all, but
you've got like the Holdens versus the Fords over there, and I mean we don't get Holden in Europe. It's kind of a Vauxhall badge, but they are actually, they're not Vauxhall courses that are going around there or Astras. They are their own like proper cars. They're pretty decent flying around there. One thing they do or used to do in Australia, it has been a couple of years since I've been, but they used to do like I think they used to call it the Performance Challenge, and they basically put 3 cars on the start line. So they put an F1 car, a V8 touring car from the Aussie sort of series, and then they put like an AMG, so Mercedes AMG 63 or whatever, something like that. And they basically set the AMG off to go around the track. It would get pretty much to the back straight, or like 2/4 of the way around, or something like that. Then they'd set off the V8, and then as they're getting around the back straight, they'd set off the F1 car. And it used to be David Coulthard that would drive it, and it used to be one of the V10s. So you could hear this thing screaming around the track. And they'd do this over a weekend. And the idea was that they'd all be at this kind of cross the line at the same sort of time. And say they'd do it 3 times over the weekend. By the time they came around to the 3rd time of doing it, they were all like crossing the line pretty much the same time. And the first time around, the F1 car would just absolutely melt a lot of them. But they'd get the timings right over the weekend. And it was amazing to watch, because we sit there and we watch F1 on TV. Some of us are lucky enough to go to races and see cars actually on track and feel the speed there. But until you see it alongside a fast road car, you don't quite get that in your head of how fast they're actually going and how they stick to the corners compared to a road car going around some of them corners. It's essentially as if they're chasing the safety car around.
Yeah, I've seen that clip. I love it because if it's the same clip I've seen, they set the first car off, as you say, the AMG is going, and you hear it scream, tear off down the start straight.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, David Coulthard's on the start line. I think he's reading a newspaper, and he's like, better put my helmet on now.
Yeah.
And then he's putting his gloves on, and as you say, the V8 supercar sets off. And at this point, he's still like, oh, should I get in the car? And he then sort of meanders over to the car. He gets in, the car's still going around, and goes, oh, okay. And then, as you say, they meet at the end of the lap, which is just, as I say, just phenomenal when you see that.
It would be great to see it on the tracks. That would be fantastic to see it on the tracks. But yeah,
it would.
It's good. They put on a great show. So I'm very happy that the Aussies are back at where they belong at the beginning of the season, and hopefully that continues for a few more years.
Yeah, I think they mentioned it's because Ramadan started that Saudi Arabia and Bahrain have been moved back. So hopefully it isn't just 1 year, but we'll obviously see when the 2026 calendar gets announced whether it's back. But we ought to talk about the Formula One. We ought to get back to this year's race. And it was an entertaining one. When you went, did you get to see a wet race? It's not typically a race that gets rained on, but when it does, it throws up a really entertaining race.
Yeah, we had a wet day on like a practice day and a quali day, and when it comes down, it does rain. It rains hard, but it like half an hour later, it can be dry as well. It's but yeah, it can really mess things up, obviously, as we've seen in the past and things like that. I think the biggest issue, and you might not even get that on TV as well, is the low light. So whilst it's 3:30 in the morning, we're watching it here. I think the race starts over there at sort of like 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So they literally do have a 2.5 hour window to get it done before all of the light sort of drops down. So it's pretty tight. But yeah, I guess I've not seen any conditions like we saw at the weekend when I've been over there. But it has rained, and it has rained good. But just luckily enough, not when there's been an F1 session on when I've been over there.
Yeah, the one that sticks in my mind, I think it was 2012, the one that Kimi Räikkönen won.
Yeah.
And yeah, that one was pretty wet and wild, and yeah, it was kind of interesting. I posted up on Fred saying I just wanted, because it's the first race of the year, especially, I just wanted a clean, dry weekend where we get a good understanding of the running order. And actually,
Yeah.
I think we got a very good impression of that. But obviously, we'll see next week when we're racing in China, or the end of this week, even racing in China, whether that plays out. But we also had the setting of the rookies, and that's where I want to start the review, really, because it all kicked off for one in particular, Ollie Behrman, in the first practice session. And his story sort of leads us straight into the race quite nicely. But unfortunately for him, because he has a bit of an off, and I've seen many drivers have this accident at that corner as well. Martin Brundle was stood. He was at the section 9 and 10, where he went off a very fast left, very fast right. And he said this, I think it was Mercedes claimed that is the highest lateral load that the cars go through all season, that left and that right. And anytime I've played the F1 game and gone through those corners, you have to get the left perfect, because if you're half a meter offline through the left, you're 2 meters offline when you go through the right, and then there's gravel, and then the walls come very quickly at you. And unfortunately, that's what caught Ollie Behrman out quite hard.
It almost feels like a bit of a rite of passage for a rookie to do that at an Australian race, doesn't it? You know, they've had very limited testing before the actual season starts, and even though Ollie Behrman, you know, we've seen him do fantastic for Ferrari in past races and things like that. It's interesting because obviously the car will be different. He's in the Haas, so you know it's not going to have quite the downforce and the grip that the Ferrari that he was in before was used to. So I'm not kind of surprised that that's happened. In fact, I would have put money on that there would be a rookie hitting that corner and doing that this weekend. It doesn't make him any worse of a driver or anything else like that. I think the lad's got a lot of talent. So yeah, get those out of the way early season, and you know, have a stronger season from there. That's what I would say.
That's it. I mean, again, something discussed before was the fact that they only have 3 days testing for the whole team now. So typically they've only had a day and a half to get up to speed before they arrive in Australia and are told to push to the limit, and you're suddenly practicing for a race weekend. So yeah, that was definitely a question I saw bandied around after this weekend. Is a day and a half of testing effectively for these rookies, is it enough time? We know that they're well drilled, that they're well practiced, that they jump in the simulators regularly, that they've come through F3, F2. It's taken them several years of racing to get to F1, but you know, we love F1 because it's the pinnacle, it's the fastest, it's the hardest sport, supposedly the hardest motorsport to get to grips with. So as you say, it's expected really that there be these errors that creep in, and as you say, in that corner as well, particularly. So yeah, I hope it doesn't damage his confidence. If there was any sign that it might have, was when he obviously had to sit out practice 2. He gets into the car in practice 3, goes, right, I'm going to make a redemption of myself in here, and he goes and has another one. And I mean, again, you can't blame any of them for it. Their rookies are still finding their way. And yeah, that probably wasn't the start to the weekend he was after, but luckily his race, once he got there, was a lot more straightforward. And he did make it to the finish. So yeah, a bit of a baptism of fire for Ollie Behrman driving in at Haas, but hopefully a cleaner weekend in China for him. But it really set the tone, didn't it, for all these rookies then having these issues across the weekend.
Yeah, I always find that, you know, when we've got quite a few that have come in this year. You know, last year we had no changes on the grid whatsoever, so we might have kind of forgot that, you know, some fresh new faces are always going to make a few mistakes and things like that. and there's always one that stands out in the first few races where you go, "Oh my God, what a talent!"
Yeah.
Or there's always somebody who has the unfortunate thing of crashing every first couple of race weekends of a season. It's like you say, they don't get a lot of testing. Maybe we need a rookie test after the actual F1 test. But even on that case, Lewis came out and said, he's still learning the car. This is a 7-time world champion that's moved from one top team to another. So he's learning the balance of the car, learning what all the switches are doing and stuff like that. This is a guy that's done it for years and years and years. Whereas these guys are getting in and, they probably, what does this DRS button do? It's things like that. So, but all in all, I don't think any of them did anything particularly bad. None of them were a Mazepin. So,
and it's very different, isn't it? It was wet. Most of them had their issues in the wet to dry race. Again, a wet race, if someone spins off, Formula One driver or not, you sort of go, well, it's very tricky conditions. Even the best drivers are going to slip up. So, yeah, it's to be expected, as you say. And obviously, really felt for Isaac Hajar when he gets out, and you just see the emotion as he's walking down, even with the helmet on, and he's just gripping it here because you can see he's trying everything. I've had it before where you've got like a fly or something in your eye and your eyes are streaming. You're trying your best to get your hands through your visor and just get something, just to swipe it away so no one catches it.
In all honesty, let's be honest, you shouldn't be crashing on the formation lap. It's not the kind of thing that should happen, but it does. It has happened. Cars break down, things like that.
I mean, let's not forget that Stroll did it last year at Brazil. And again, there's someone who's been in the sport since 2017, I think. So in the wet conditions, you tend to be a bit more favourable when it's their first Grand Prix, when they're trying to. It was Isaac Hajar's first time driving in the wet in Formula One. So to drop it trying to warm the tyres up, yes, you can look and go, it's a bit silly. But I mean, I feel like he's probably more upset about the fact he's got to go back to explain it to Helmut Marko, because I'm going to go out there and say it. What an idiot. I mean, his comments today saying, like, oh, that's just, he looks dumb or whatever it was that he said. I didn't even give him the time of day to read his comments, because you got Anthony Hamilton standing up there going, I saw him and I had to be a dad. And then you got Helmut Marko being a prick. There you go.
We all know what Helmut Marko's like. So, he's, given that he's in charge of like driver development, he seems to know very little about driver development. So,
right.
Which is interesting. He's not the kind of guy that's ever going to put his arm around you and say, right, we'll sort this out. Just wait till the next race, it'll be better. He's a horrible man in that respect.
Yeah.
I think there's a level of like crashing out formation lap and stuff like that. Losing it behind the safety car. Grosjean did that in Baku years ago and stuff like that. It was Baku, I think, something like that. There's all these sort of things that can happen, which, whether you're experienced, whether you're a rookie, this is just racing. This is racing. Who knows what's gone on? I felt for him a lot, and you want to start that first Grand Prix. You want to do that, and there's a lot of pressure on him because they've signed. I can't remember what the guy's name is that they've signed on a multi-year contract
at VCARB.
Yeah.
Trying to think. What driver?
Yeah, there's somebody that's being signed in the Red Bull thing that's sat waiting in the wings, isn't there? Or am I thinking of Alpine? I can't remember.
You're thinking of Colapinto.
Alpine. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm getting all of them mixed up. Yeah,
that brings us on to our next point beautifully. Don't worry, because the next rookie to fall into issue was Jack Doohan, who's got a huge amount of pressure, because guess what? Alpine have just signed to a long-term contract. Franco Colapinto, would you believe, Andy?
Yeah. And I think they're just waiting for him to trip up.
Yeah.
And I don't like that feeling. I think there's been times during the middle of the season you've gone, yeah, I can understand why they changed that driver or something like that. But then when you see, I don't know, Alpine is just a bit of a car crash, really, as well.
Well, I postured last week that they'd signed Doohan pretty quickly because they were worried about the Piastri Alonso situation they found themselves in, where they suddenly had to hire someone. They saw Doohan sat there and said, let's get him signed up, and then if something comes along that's better, Franco Colapinto, we'll do what we can. So I feel like he's just gonna sit out do like a minimum amount of contracted races that they can before they find reason to do a swap. And it's horrible, but that is Formula One in a nutshell, isn't it? So Doohan basically is on trial now. He's got to do a few races to say, look, I am worth F1 if someone else wants to take me on, and that's the situation.
But it's always happened. It happens a lot less than it used to. If you go back to the days of Martin Brundle, and obviously I'm going back to the days where TV was in black and white and everything like that, but Brundle would have like 6 races in a car, and then somebody else would replace him, and then there'd be somebody else 6 races down. There was always, especially in almost a number 2 driver role, you were there to support the bigger driver of the two, and
we don't have that anymore. They sign sort of 1 or 2 year deals or multi-year deals. But as you say, back then they were on race by race deals. You'd have a contract for that weekend only.
Nigel Mansell, even though he won championships and everything else like that, was on a short-term contract deal in Ferrari after he won championships and everything. It's a different thing now. But yeah, I think somebody sat waiting in the wings is never a good place. It's a bit like Danny Ricciardo with Liam Lawson in every shot for the last couple of years. And you were just like, oh god. So
yeah, it was. You're linking very nicely to the next rookie there, right? Yeah, it's like you're well drilled at this.
It's
so
like I've done
Liam Lawson
before, Terry.
Yes, by the way, it's your fault that I'm doing this now, by the way, because I enjoyed coming on as a guest so many times that I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to sit and wait to be a guest. I'm going to go out there and do it myself. So that's the story behind it. But Liam Lawson then. So we've, as you say, touched on it. His first time jumping into a Red Bull, and again he struggled. But were we surprised? He's jumped into Max Verstappen's teammate role, which seems to be a cursed seat and has been since Daniel Ricciardo jumped out of it.
Yeah, I once again, I don't think he did anything particularly wrong this weekend. I think could have had a stronger qualifying.
Yeah, I was going to say that the race you'd allow. Again, it's where it's tricky, but the going out in Q1 in a Red Bull, and again, I've seen Verstappen and Red Bull fans out there in the wild online saying that they've got the 8th quickest car. I'm sorry, but you haven't. It's at least in the top 4. And so therefore Lawson needs to be targeting Q3. But after going out in Q1, maybe he ought to look at this weekend and go, okay, at least Q2. And then he's doing better than Perez.
Yeah. And I think the only yardstick you can measure him by is, has he done better than what Perez would have done in that car? Maybe not in the first race, because Perez sometimes used to start quite well in the season and then just drop off massively. But certainly for, we'll call him a rookie, even though he's done a few races before. It's been a bit disjointed what he's been able to do before. And, even though they weren't even in, like, we're in a Racing Bulls or whatever. But he's, that Red Bull car is built and set up for Max Verstappen and the way that he wants it. So it'll be a very different drive to what he's been used to. He's just going to get used to it. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he comes, he's not going to beat Verstappen. That would be ridiculous. And certainly I don't think they put anyone in that car that might beat him. But you want him to be finishing in the top 6 if that Red Bull is good enough. or one or two places maybe behind. I think one of the things that you've got to take into consideration, especially around, we're getting to the end of the sort of regulations. All the cars are pretty close. At the start of the regulations, you probably had a bigger gap of time-wise. Now it's generally a second that splits the whole grid, which is very, very close when you come and look at it. And even in the top 10, it's very, very close time-wise. You could literally, tenth of a second could take you down 4 places. So I'm not so convinced he did anything bad or really worse, or anything worse than what Perez would have done. But I think if by the time we get to Barcelona, he's not scoring points, I think the questions have to be asked then, because he's in a winning car.
Yeah. And as we discussed, Helmut Marko and the Red Bull team are not a team typically that will wait around for you to find your feet.
No, but what works in his favour is unless Yuki Tsunoda suddenly changes into someone else and puts his disguise on, they're never putting him in that car for some reason. Yeah, hand on heart, I think he's a better driver than Lawson. I think you get more out of it. I think maybe what doesn't work in Yuki's favour is the Honda connection, with that disappearing, and also his kind of fiery nature. I think probably doesn't work with because Red Bull are really laid back, aren't they?
Yeah, they're worried about all those fines if they have to start paying Max Verstappen swearing
exactly.
and Yuki Tsunoda in the other seat swearing left, right, and centre. Then they won't be able to afford it. But
it's not like they would break the budget cap.
No, they'd never do that. No. They're very, very mindful of that. I've seen it put around as well. Like when you think of Red Bull, as you say, Tsunoda's sat there. He still thinks that he is targeting a Red Bull seat. I've said I'd like to see him look at Aston Martin when they take on the Honda deal. The big question mark for the Red Bull family then is if they lost Tsunoda and if they didn't want Lawson as well, is who's next. I think Arvid Lindblad is probably the closest they've got to that talented driver they can pick up. But otherwise, they've just got other names.
But what they're looking for, they're looking for another Ricciardo, they're looking for another Vettel, they're looking for another Verstappen to go in there. They're not looking for another Daniel Kvyat or Sebastian Bourdais or anything like that. They want another driver to come through that academy, but I don't see, who would you say the last good second driver to come out of that academy was? I'd say Carlos Sainz. And they let him go, without a fight. So,
again, it takes you back to that question. Helmut Marko's there to develop drivers, and all he seems to do, he either develops them to the point they leave, or he just goes, no, yes, no, thank you, and out the door. So, big question marks over the Red Bull Academy at the moment, despite owning like a quarter of the Formula 2 grid in Red Bull colours in F2. They don't seem to actually have anyone capable of it. And it's been the last few years where, say, a quarter of the grid's Red Bull, and then it's someone else, Frederick Vesti or Gabriel Bortoleto, that's taken the F2 title. And look, I've done an Andy, and I've transitioned to the last rookie that I want to cover at this point, Gabriel Bortoleto, who I thought had one of the stronger weekends than maybe just the one other. He didn't put a foot wrong. He wasn't particularly off pace. In qualifying, he got through to Q2. His teammate did not. We'll talk about his teammate later on, who had a better race. But that was a big surprise. Qualifying straight away, got into Q2. His teammate didn't. He's out qualified in 1-0 to Gabriel Bortoleto. I thought he did really well. It was only late on in the race, unfortunately, he got caught out in the same place that the McLarens did. We'll cover in a bit. And that was the end of his race. But apart from that, didn't put a foot wrong.
I think out of all of the incidents this weekend, that's the one where you kind of go, fair cop, man. yeah, I think his and probably sort of yeah. I was going to say maybe Saints. You can kind of think, right, yeah, even maybe Alonso's, but I don't know. It's the rain was coming down pretty hard, and you do karting quite a lot, and the rule of thumb is when it's wet, stay off anything that's shiny because you're not getting any grip.
Yeah.
So I think it was just very unlucky for him. I think he just hit the wrong piece of the road at the wrong time, and maybe the throttle was too eager or something like that. I mean, not seeing his telemetry or anything else like that, you can't really sort of look at it in that way. But certainly, yeah, well, it made for an exciting race and another safety car coming out, didn't it? So
Yeah, I think we had 4 safety cars. Trying to count them, and I was like, no way we had 4 safety cars, but pretty sure it was that many. You know, when we had that many incidents, and yeah, it's pretty dramatic race.
I wonder what the record is for safety cars in a race. There must be. It's got to be something like 5 or 6 or something like that, isn't it?
I'd imagine it's 6. I don't know why. Just off the top of my head, I want to say 6, and I want to say Canada as well.
Yeah, Canada's 2011 sounds like you could have it there, but are we just thinking that because of Button's win that time? Was there that many safety cars? Right.
Is this
anyone out there
McLaren
listening to
favoritism?
us, then we'd love to know.
Yeah. Comment if you know when the record was for the most safety cars. Tell us if we're right and whether we get if we should do a pub quiz episode where we just make it up on the spot. We don't know the answers to the questions. We just ask them as we go. But bringing us back onto some kind of onto the track or maybe off it. You mentioned then Sainz and Alonso's crashes, and quite interesting. You know, Sainz happened behind the safety car. I believe Williams came out in the race and said that it was to do with a gearbox issue. It basically selected gear mid-corner, which, I mean, I as you say, I play racing games and go-kart, whatever it is. But typically when I play racing games, I'm on controller and I don't have enough hand-eye coordination to do my own gears. So I leave it on automatic. And the amount of times where I'm throttling through a corner, then the game goes, you've reached the revs now to change gear, and I spin off. Because you're not expecting it. So I can completely understand if he's pulled to change gear and then it's taken even half a second for the car to do something, then it's enough to throw it off. But the big question that one raised, if he's spinning off behind a safety car, was the safety okay? And this raises a question later when there was another safety car and the safety car itself passes a recovery vehicle on track. Lando Norris goes past, Verstappen goes past, and again, online media, people talking, going, that's not good, I don't want to see that. And I mean, they waved it away as, well, if you shouldn't be in F1 if you're going to hit those, the risk was minimal. But as we're discussing, Sainz went off behind safety car. So is it a good point? Do we want to see recovery vehicles on track?
I have to agree with a lot of people on the internet for once, which is very rare. I'm always wary after what happened to Jules Bianchi about any kind of external vehicle coming onto the track. Now, marshals as well. I know marshals come on, but marshals are normally controlled on and off the track by race control. So they will go on the track, pick up debris when there's a break or it gets red flag. I do think there has to be a way to recover vehicles without neutralizing the race and red flagging it. But I do also think that there needs to also be the safety of the people who are working, the safety of the drivers, the safety of the spectators looked at. It always worries me when you see a JCB or a track or a crane come on to remove something, because these cars are still quite low. They still crumple. And if the car goes into the side of one of them, even with the halo, I think maybe now the halo would help, given what it is. But that driver's in a lot of danger. And even the speed.
Don't want to test it.
Don't want to test it. Don't want to find it out. even with the speeds they're doing, and you might be saying, "Oh, it's not that fast." Hitting a stationary sort of let's call them what they are, planned vehicles, for moving things around. These are heavy
Yeah.
things. There's a lot of damage there. I'd like to see something so that if a recovery vehicle does come on track, where maybe there's a safety car going around, or even a virtual safety car that takes the delta down a lot more, so that you can kind of maybe neutralize the risk to that, especially when it's raining, because that's what happened in Japan. It was raining, and
Yeah.
two cars went off at the same place. It's never a great sort of thing to happen. If one car's gone off, as Martin Brundle quite obviously says a lot of the times, another one can go off straight away in that same thing. And a lot of the incidents that we've had with drivers seriously injured in the past few years have all been where there's been a second car involved in the same place. And Formula One is you're never going to be able to say it's safe, because there's always a risk, and that's part of the beauty of it. But the risk should be the drivers taking that risk, not there's something external that puts them at risk. That's just my feeling on it.
I agree, because yes, you can say, as I said, they're going low speed, but as we discussed, what if? And as soon as you open up that question, what if, then you can go into whatever possibility you like. So, suspension breaks, part of the drive shaft breaks, and the car suddenly lurches left into the side of that truck. The truck wins. So, yeah, I tend to agree. And we know that the safety car can stop, but these cars can come to a stop and it not completely kill them off if the safety car does it in a way. So in a safe way, in a slow descent, not just a sudden yank on the brakes. So there was no real reason for the safety car to overtake that lorry at that point. I don't know why it felt the need to, because just 50 meters, 100 meters down the road, I think the lorry would have turned left or right across the track. So why not just bunch the field up, just keep them there for a second? Because the safety car is the top option after just a red flag.
Before bringing it out, wait until
Yeah,
cars go past and bring it out after that. We saw.
I think that section of track though, where Alonso had gone off, it's this new section where there's just walls. It used to be that there was a section, there was an actual chicane there, and they took that away and replaced it with this wall section that just goes round. And now there's no, as far as I can see, in or out, and that's why you've got this long section of just walls where the cars have got to go past. So that's why I imagine that came about. But yeah, there's got to be better options available to them, as you say, waiting for the field to go by, then setting off down there and hoping you can clear it, and telling the safety car, look, we're on track and we need a window of 2 minutes. Can you slow your pace down? Because the alternative is a red flag at this point. Safety car is the most safe they can get. So yeah, didn't like to see that, definitely, and I'm glad obviously it was okay. But I mentioned Alonso's crash as well. He complained about the gravel. Now Piastri had just gone through it just a few seconds before, and I don't know if this is just an Alonsoism that he's basically saying, you shouldn't be able to bring gravel onto the track. But I'm pretty sure anytime anyone goes off anywhere and there's gravel, it's going to bring gravel on. And this was a problem throughout the weekend. It's always a problem here on this particular corner, that it's going to bring gravel onto the track. Antonelli fell foul of it in qualifying as well. It damaged the bib, the underside of his car in qualifying as well, and knocked him out in Q1. So yeah, it was very uncharacteristic. But even again, just still saying that even if Alonso can crash, and he's the most experienced F1 driver, then anyone can crash. So I think it vindicates the rookies yet again.
Yeah, and I think Alonso probably knows every excuse in the book at this point. And
Andy, he wrote half of them.
He did, yeah.
Once upon a time.
Yeah. But also, these are the best drivers in the world, the 20 best drivers in the world. They should be able to handle changing conditions like that. And I think, I don't know, my gut feeling that the dog of a car this year is the Aston after the first weekend. That's my feeling. That right, I expected them to have made a bit more of a jump, and maybe they will. I can hardly talk. Being a McLaren fan, we had a bit of a dog of a car 2 years ago, and we didn't start the season well. So there's plenty of scope for them to do better. But I think I expected more, and I think what we're starting to hear from Alonso is what he's said in previous teams just before he's left at some point when things are not going his way. So I'm not surprised it was the gravel's fault.
Yeah, we'll see for him to come back, but yeah, he would never turn around Alonso. I don't think in his 48-year career or whatever he's had in Formula One that he's ever turned around and said, "Do you know what? Hands up, that was on me." So why change a habit of a lifetime?
Yeah.
He's always going to blame something else. So yeah, it was as I say, it was just the weather and the whole point of that you made there about the Aston Martin not being a great car. We spoke about this in our sort of predictions for the season last week, and we all sort of put Aston Martin quite low, where this is a team that in the last few years have been looking at 5th place realistically as where they're going to be best of the rest. And now this year, I think they're going to really struggle to get there based on this opening weekend. They've got to hope that some of these drawings and parts that get thrown in front of Adrian Newey's nose whilst he's trying to probably work fully on the 2026 car, let's face it, that he can make micro improvements across the board and maybe help them this year with minimal effort.
I think we'll see more of Newey's genius in 2026.
Yeah.
I think this is a continuation of last season's car with a few new stickers and a bit more of a paint job. I don't think there's a lot of development going to go into that car this season. But yeah, I think there's been a few surprises this weekend, but it's the first race of the season, and it was raining, and I think there's been people that are. I guess if we move on to the sort of next topic there, we're talking about sort of three-way fight for the win. I'd say there's 4 teams that are there at the top still. I think you've got McLaren, who seems to have the best car, and obviously going to be biased in saying that, but I think a lot of the George Russell definitely came out and said that we looked good in every condition. We were at some point 1.16 seconds ahead in the dry, so we've got a car that will perform. Now, I'm not of the illusion that we're just going to win every race. That's not going to happen because some tracks will suit our cars, some won't. There'll be ones where Red Bull are sort of stronger. I think there's, if I was going for a top 4 pecking order, I'm looking at sort of McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. So essentially similar to what we had last year. But I think easily any of us could swap around any of those places, depending on track, depending on environments and stuff like that. My biggest surprise was how much Max Verstappen squeezed out of that Red Bull.
He had a very good weekend, I think.
Yeah.
It asked that question. We sort of touched on it with Liam Lawson when we were talking about it. It's whether the Red Bull is a bad car inherently, and Max is maximizing it, to excuse the pun, or if the car is just so heavily lean towards Max's driving style. The thought that an entire car is designed to a driving style doesn't really sit with me. I just think it's just got such a narrow window. It likes to be driven in such a way to get the best out of it, and if you can't get it within that window, and this is a problem that plagued Mercedes as well in the past, if you can't get it in the window, then you're nowhere. So Max, I think, has just got an inherent ability to put it in that window week in, week out. And I think we do have to, even as 2 McLaren fans, unfortunately at this point, I think we do have to give him a little bit of credit and say he pushed Lando and Oscar this weekend closer than anyone else seemed able to get.
Yeah, I'd agree. But I think if China plays out the way I think it might, he's not going to be playing with the McLarens. He's going to be playing with the Ferraris. That's my hope as a McLaren fan.
I agree. I think the biggest shock for me this weekend was Ferrari. I think we have to talk about them, and unfortunately, Ray's not here to defend them. But my first question was going to be, go on, is how soon do they turn around and go, next year's our year? Because qualifying, they weren't anywhere. Race, they weren't really anywhere. I don't think that's how they expect it to be. And yes, it can change very quickly when we get to a real race circuit, not a street circuit like Melbourne is. But yeah, I don't think that's the weekend they were expecting.
I just feel like they just didn't have the right strategy people again. I feel like they jumped back to 2023 strategy Ferrari. There was a few points in the race where Charles and Lewis were. You could even talk to the race engineers and like, well, what are we doing? Do we stay out? Do we keep going? What's the plan? And I think certainly from Lewis's point of view, I think he'll knock that into shape pretty quickly, because Mercedes were never really kind of like, all right, yeah, Lewis will complain, I'm not on the right tyres, my tyres have gone, whatever. No, this is what's happening. And I think Ferrari need to be a bit stronger on that. You can't write them off. I think the rain chucked them to the bottom of the pack for the top 10. And when you look at it, I think that's probably a car that you were talking about, the Red Bull being in a small window. I think possibly the Ferrari is as well. But once they nail what that is, they'll be fast. They'll be rapid.
Yeah, they seem to have suggested that the ceiling for this car is a lot higher. They've just got to get there. So be interesting to see if how quickly they get there will be more the point. If it will be within a week or if it will be within half a season, what it might be. But yeah, it was a bit of a weekend for them, bit of a journey for Lewis Hamilton. As he says, he's still adapting to the car, as you say. And if a 7-time champion, someone's been in for years, is saying that they're adapting to the car, and there will be an adjustment. And I feel like 2025 is pretty much that adjustment. It's going to take him the year. But what was funny to me was when he was saying, he's got his is it Adami on the radio talking to him saying, okay, Lewis, if you could just test K1, just let us know if that's working. And he turns back around and goes, no, I will. Don't talk to me. I'm good. And they go, okay, but test K1. And he's like, no, don't talk to me. Like, I'm concentrating. So again, I think bit of team in there, they'll learn quickly that when Lewis says, just leave me to it, he means just leave him to it. Let him do what he does best.
Yes. I think that's the thing, isn't it? You've got, you've got to take that. There'll be a little bit of an adjustment going from the years that he had at Mercedes. And also remember, Lewis is now driving the first car that's not had a Mercedes engine for him. So there's very different things as well. So, it could even be that Lewis was like, I don't even know what K1 is. It's all new to me. So
that could be a strategy. That could be a strategy to them, couldn't it? Right, we're on strategy K1.
Got down to strategy K1, something's gone wrong, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But I wouldn't put it past them. Yeah, they got the strategy call wrong, didn't they? They sort of gambled, but then very quickly realized the gamble wasn't right on a drying track, that they were better off pitting. And it also caught Yuki Tsunoda. So he qualified well and then quickly looked and went, hang on, how did he end up so far out of the points? And he got caught in the same way. He pitted at the same time as the Ferraris and ended up behind them. So, and then he got caught by Piastri. So yeah, we want to talk about McLaren. Let's get into the McLaren fight that we saw. And when you're watching qualifying, did you think it was going to be as good as it was? But again, McLaren bias, we're saying.
So I've followed McLaren for a long time. I almost got to the point where I forgot what it was like for us to win until a couple of years ago. What I've never sort of experienced is going into the season as favourites. Even back when we had Lewis and he won the championship and that in the McLaren, we didn't really go into the season next year as favourites. We had a good car, but it wasn't right. Let's go and do this, and it's very unusual for me to feel right. We've done testing and seem to be at the top of the pile. And everybody's telling us that we're pretty good, and I'm expecting things to come back. Obviously being not so much of a glass half full guy here, but sort of. I remember years ago when we did some testing, we had a first day and we were like beating everybody by loads, and found out that they put some of the suspension on the wrong way up. And when they turned it back, we were like midfield, and it was like, right, I was just expecting something like that to happen. So life as a McLaren fan has not been plain sailing recently. So I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts. But I'm also apprehensive. I'm not going to be going into a weekend with a mindset of thinking, well, we're just going to win this because we're McLaren. We've got the fastest car. I think the end of last year certainly proved that. Everybody said, oh, McLaren got the fastest car. They got the fastest car. You still got to convert that to a pole position. Still got to convert that to a race win. And to do that, I think last year the team needed to learn how to win. And I'm hoping this year we've learned that. We can take it through, and we've got a much better plan of how to do that and keep going. I'd love us to win another Constructors and a Drivers' Championship. I'm not going to say which driver I think would win. Probably not the one you think. But I think we've got two good drivers who can challenge. Whether they're strong enough to beat a Max Verstappen, who is essentially a one-man team where everything will be going towards him to win as many points and maximize as much points for him, I don't know. It's going to be close. But certainly, I've got a good feeling about it. I'm slightly concerned what happens when the wing changes happen. I think they're for European races, aren't they? So, but as Zach said, do you know what? We might have negated that already. We might have something in the pipeline that's even better than that. I don't know. Triple DRS wings or whatever we've come up with. There might be something crazy that then gets banned 5 races later or whatever, or something like that. There's certain. I feel like we're on the right path. I feel like this is our opportunity. I feel like 2026 is the big reset again. We can't count on being at the top of that. But I think we've got things in place that have put us back to the top. And that's what we want to carry on with. Progress.
I think there are a lot of ticks in the right boxes this weekend.
Yeah.
Getting through Q1, Q2 safely, getting through practice, doing all that things. But yeah, those laps in Q3. So Norris had his deleted. Piastri, he made an error in the second to last corner, and they were under the cosh, and it was tricky for them, but they got through, and their lap times were just that much clear, so it really proved that the pressure on, they can both deliver that lap. And then with all the rain, with all the chaos that there was in the race, McLaren made the right pit stops for the right tires at the right time. They got every single strategy call.
We double stacked.
Right.
We double stacked, and that made a huge difference. And I think whilst if you looked at the actual results, you think, oh, Piastri finished 9th. His recovery was one of the most impressive things of the weekend for me. He didn't give up. A lot of drivers would have gotten out of the car at that point when they've gone just about to go a lap down. But he's like, no, do you know what? I'm going to reverse.
Yeah. Martin Brundle called that. Martin Brundle was there saying he needs to find reverse. And I hadn't thought of that. I thought he was out of the car. I was just about to write he's out because I saw the wheel spin and thought he's out. And he said, no, he needs to find reverse. And that's never going to work. But no, it did. And that time on Clarkson's farm certainly helped him out. But I mean, that's just a very small. Again, we talk about these mistakes that are easy to make. Norris was the first on the scene. He went off. Piastri second on the scene, went off. I almost felt like Norris was helped. I saw a view. I'm going to put it in the notes for this episode. There's a view from behind that you see. Norris is almost helped by the fact he goes further off the track, which means that when he cuts back through the gravel trap onto the track, he doesn't cut across as much grass, which was the undoing for Piastri. So he's almost hurt by going off not as much as Norris. So, I mean, we're talking small details.
He had far too much momentum coming back on the track, did Piastri? Like you said, he took a lot of speed through that. And, you know, what do you do? Do you hit the brakes as you've gone off? What do they actually do? You know, it's that point you're on a very slick track. And it wasn't just us that were struggling with that corner and everything. But, you know, we're out there out front, so we're first at the scene of the accident. So it's like, right, we're going to be, everyone behind is going to go, they've gone off, right? Oh, we can come into that corner a little bit more cautiously and not go off. So, yeah.
But as you say, we had built, I say we, like we're McLaren. We had a 16-second advantage up until Alonso's crash, which brought the safety car out. So suddenly when this rain arrives, the field has bunched up that much more, though there's that much more pressure that they do have to drive it that quickly. You know, Verstappen's now right behind us, and this was at the point when they had dry tires on. McLaren had fitted hard tires. Verstappen was in the minority that had gone for mediums, so I think some teams felt, or a lot of teams felt, they wouldn't make it to the end. From there, obviously they had to switch back to inters very shortly after this anyway, but yeah, they were under pressure. They had to push on because of a safety car. So again, I think normal conditions, they might have been a bit more cautious and they wouldn't have gone off, and Piastri finishes second, even first. So I think as far as McLaren can look at this weekend, it's although the results don't show it, it couldn't have gone much better for them. There's lots of ticks in the right boxes. There's lots of, I was going to say silver linings, but I would suggest that it's not just a silver cloud. You know, everything looks good, and as I say, we'll see if that form continues this weekend in China. But I'm sure Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull are all going to come back. And
it's a very long season.
It's really is. Yeah, it's only one race in, one very specific race. As I say, it's a street track. So, you know, is our car just suited better to Melbourne? Very possibly. Very probably. So, we'll see. And you mentioned the wings as well. And I was saying to you before we started recording that obviously a lot of talk on the front wings. We were talking in the prediction show about the fact that this rear wing change has come in for the start of the season. Front wings won't be changed till race 9. And so that gives other teams the 8 races to point and go, look what their wing's doing. And actually what's happened today is the FIA have said, we've reviewed and watched the footage looking back at the rear wings on all the cars. We're going to adjust the test. We're going to make it a more stringent test. And obviously, again, a lot of talk online straight away was, well, it's McLaren. They're trying to rein in. Yeah. McLaren seem to suggest they're okay. I'm again, this is a tactical team seem to say, but that will be, again, it just means that each race we're going to be talking about these flexi wings.
Pretty much since I can remember watching F1, there's always been they've done that. There was the Benettons have got traction. There's an extra fuel tank in this car. You know, things like that. They're always happening. There was always somebody pointing the finger saying they've got something extra. They've got this. They don't do that well. Or, you know, I think James Hunt in '76 that had a race disqualified because the rear wing was a millimeter over. You know, and it's part of the sport.
It's actually a big part
of it, but it's part of the sport.
It's actually probably one of the biggest parts that I enjoy is seeing teams come up with these ingenuity and coming up with these ingenious ideas. Like I was talking to a colleague about the F duct and saying, how on earth an engineer sits down and says, I've got this switch which is operated by someone's knee. It was just baffling that someone came up with that. And we kind of need a bit of that, because the last thing I can think of that F1 had that was anything like that was the DAS system on the Mercedes, which again, they unveil it in testing and you're sat there going, oh my God, someone's thought of everything really, haven't they? So when you need a bit of that.
When you look at it, you think, that's so obvious.
Yeah.
When the DAS, you're like, that's so obvious. Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't every other? And what they had brilliantly with that was that no other team could really copy that until they built a new car.
Absolutely. So they wrote it out pretty quickly. I've got to give a shout out to my dad at this point, because at one point, and we're going back to like early 2000s, I remember drawing a car, and I drew it with the exhaust out the back, like just in front of the rear diffuser, and said, "Oh, it's going to blow the diffuser." And I think I remember him looking at it going, "Oh yeah, that's good." And then obviously it came out like 2010, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Dad, I drew that. I drew that idea. Why aren't I famous? Why aren't I designing F1 cars?"
Yeah.
So, but it's amazing what, sometimes you just come at it with fresh green eyes that hasn't seen a problem before, and you can come up with some sort of ingenious thing that either gets banned or has someone whinge about it, because that seems to be what's happened. That a team, we won't say which one, but we're pretty sure we know, have gone ahead and whinged, and so the changes will happen for this weekend again.
Yeah, and 2 or 3 years ago, there was us, Mercedes, and Ferrari all pointing fingers at another team because they were winning all the time, or we're all right. Oh, Red Bull have done this, or Red Bull have that. Sometimes these things are held up, sometimes they're not. Look at the Ferrari fuel thing a few years ago. You got the best minds in the sport who can design around this, and one of the more famous ones was the third pedal.
Yes.
Hearing about that. So for anyone out there that doesn't know, there was a third pedal in a McLaren years and years ago. It was only discovered when a photographer took a photo of the cockpit in Parc Fermé, and I think it independently did braking, didn't it, for one side of the car and the other? So you could control.
It was Mark Heath and Matt Bishop, I believe, were the two that uncovered it, because one of them, I can't remember which one, noted that the brakes were getting hotter on one side to the other.
Yeah.
And so they said, they're doing something, we need to get a shot. And then Mark famously saw the car broken down by the side of the track, and he got the shot. And when I went to the MTC, I held my camera in and did the same shot, because just as a shout out to that moment, just put my camera in. And again, just another side story. We were going to enter a soapbox race in 2020 before everything got cancelled. And again, I read the rules, and it said you must have brakes. And I turned to my team that I was working with, and I said, it says you've got to have brakes, doesn't say you've got to have one brake. So immediately I said, right, if we want to go through turns, I suggest we have a left and a right brake. And that's how we're gonna win this. And if we don't need to use the brakes at all, we don't need the brakes at all. But that might just help us along if we need extra steering. But anyway, I digress from Australia there. It's good to see ingenuity, as we say. So it's just part and parcel with F1. I hope that sooner or later there will be another car with 3 pedals in it that gets unveiled,
or something like that. There'll be something comes along at some point. We'll see. You never know; it might even happen this season.
Might just. So let's just wrap up with a few other good stories from this weekend. Mentioned Bortoleto, but obviously Nico Hulkenberg had a very strong weekend, and Sauber now have in 2025 3 times as many points as they finished 2024 with, which is an incredible turnaround. I think I had them as my 10th team in the constructors, purely based on, I think they're just in a holding pattern waiting for Audi. Well, maybe it was just the rain, maybe it's the luck of the draw, maybe just quietly drove on, but that's a big result already for them.
Well, you've already touched on it. There's 2 factors that probably came together that helped for that. One is Hulkenberg's a very experienced driver, driven a lot of tracks, driven this track a lot of times, driven in the rain a lot of times, and we all know that the rain is a great leveler. It comes down to driver's skill, and he's a good driver, which is he's gone in and out of F1 a few times and come back. It doesn't normally happen. But for me, he's a good midfield driver. He's like I don't know, like a Tottenham Hotspur or a sort of kind of Premier League sort of middle team sort of thing. Every now and then they'll do something spectacular, and never quite winning the Premier League title sort of thing. By the way, I'm not a football fan, so I just picked a team. So I think that was solid for them. I don't think they've made such a leap. I think you're talking about Haas versus Sauber for the last spot.
Yeah.
My
Haas had a weak weekend, really, all round.
My not so much of a surprise, but I think Williams have jumped up to where we were a few years ago as almost the best of the rest. And I feel that they'll be fighting with Alpine and possibly Aston for that position. But I think Williams under James Vowles looked like a completely different team to what they did 2 years ago. And they seem to have things. The building blocks seem to be going in place. We could quite see a very strong Williams coming into 2026. But they've also got two good drivers. I rate Albon and I rate Sainz. So I think Williams will do pretty well. VCARB were the ones that have surprised me the most this weekend. Are we still calling them VCARB? We call them Racing Bulls this year. I don't know what they've changed their name to this year. The white red. Basically the white Red Bull.
The one that looks good.
Yeah, the negative Red Bull. I think on a good day that car's going to do pretty well and possibly even break into the kind of top four side of it. But as always, I find that some of these teams they'll drop off as the season goes when development happens and stuff like that. So especially when things start to switch to next year.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that's it's almost a bit of a negative. It used to be that the teams chased as high up in the constructors as they could get right to the last moment because it came with prize money. But now it also comes with the penalty of less wind tunnel time. So I kind of feel like they go, do you know what, if we slide from 6th to 7th, that might not be the worst thing that happened. Maybe we'll switch off the 2025 tap that little bit earlier and switch over fully to the 2026 one. So we might see that a bit more this year, with such a new rule set. It's going to be an interesting story to follow through the season, who and what team decide to do what and when in that regards.
Yeah, I think it will be quite obvious as well. But I also think that you might find a few top teams do that as well, or take their eye off the ball a little bit earlier than what they would have done on a normal season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's be honest. 2026 cars have probably been developed for the last year anyway. There's probably
they weren't allowed to, apparently, were they? It was supposed to only start work this year as of January, but I mean,
how many
it doesn't cost anything.
Cars to go on the next one. There'll have been things tested in. I wonder if this kind of works on this car that might fit on the 26 car. There'll be bits like that. What we won't have been able to do is probably start building a chassis or designing it in earnest.
Well, that's what I mean. It doesn't cost it. We're going for the design team are going for an hour-long lunch in Costa today. Do you want to join us, Adrian Newey?
Yeah, exactly.
We're taking our notepads just in case,
Well, just you need to write down your coffee order.
Yes. Absolutely. So I'm sure the FAA are doing their correct job and getting that.
There's a sentence I never thought I'd hear. I'm sure the FAA are doing a correct job.
Do you know, as I said that, I thought, do you know what, actually, got to give them credit. I think they did the right thing at the right time. Yes, there was the recovery truck, but that's, one thing. But in terms of the penalties and overturning Antonelli's as well, penalties, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think there's been
and not 4 days later either, actually on the day and within a reasonable amount of time of the finish. So fair play to them for that. It's the only grey area of that is it was a 5-second penalty. They applied it after the race, so it was very easy to overturn it. Fine. If that same penalty had come on lap 4 and he'd already served it, and then they go, do you know what, actually it was a mistake, would they still be able to rescind it? I wonder, would they have taken 5 seconds off. I think at that point they might have just had to do sorry, that's happened now.
Maybe they take 5 seconds off his time at the end. I don't know. If you can add 5 seconds at the end, surely you can take 5 seconds at the end off.
It's a very different situation then if you've waited 5 seconds at the pit stop and you come out 8th instead of 5th, and suddenly you've got 3 cars worth of it. And anyway, that's a question for another time. I didn't know whether they'd ever overturned a 5-second penalty, but I'll keep an eye. I'm going to pencil that one in for later in the season to come back to if we see them doing this more often. But yeah, other I've got to give the FIA credit, I think, for this weekend for that decision. They got things right, so long may that continue. So we've discussed all the teams. I think there's lots of stories have started. We've got a bit of a head start on the order. It's a bit of a McLaren heavy podcast, Andy. So when I ask you these 2 questions, I think I know both of the answers already. But let's wrap it up. I want to hear your driver of the day, and if it's not Norris, I'll be surprised. Driver of the day and your race highlights for me.
Right. Would you like me to just take my McLaren hat off and pick somebody who's not McLaren for these? Because
I want your Formula One fan opinion here.
Right. I was particularly impressed with Antonelli. Outside of McLaren's, I think he did a solid job as a rookie and has showed a bit of promise for the future. I think he might give George Russell a bit of a scare this year. So I'd go for non-McLaren driver of the day, Antonelli. My race highlight, it's an interesting one because obviously I would pick Lando winning. But I also feel like my race highlight, the thing that I'm going to pick is more environmental than a driver or anything else like that. But the rain gave us a really exciting race to start the season too. So my race highlight would be kind of starting off in Australia, the rain mixing everything up, and it being an entertaining race is a great way to start the season. And that is, what more do you want as a fan, right? So I'd go for that. I think that's kind of, I couldn't have asked for a better sort of start the season race outside of the McLaren stuff. If I was going McLaren, then drive the day. I would have to go with Lando. He perfect race. He held off Verstappen and everything else like that. A McLaren race highlight, I thought Oscar recovered incredibly well. That impressed me more than anything and made me think, oh, hang on, this might be a bit of a different Oscar here. I like that. Future world champion Oscar Piastri. Anyway,
that was my bold claim, and I said I think his racecraft is better than Lando's, and I think he showed that, and that's why my race highlight, on the same vein, was Oscar Piastri overtaking Lewis Hamilton on the last lap.
That was a fantastic overtake. Yeah.
Unreal, really.
That was,
that would be my highlight without being a McLaren
balls
fan.
Out that one, wasn't it? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lewis Hamilton, he's not an easy driver to pass in a Ferrari. Yes, the conditions were pretty favourable, and everyone will say, "Oh, it's the McLaren rocket ship." But to do that move in that corner, that was absolutely brilliant.
You're risking everything at that point. You're risking 2 points. It's might think, oh, it's not much, but you're risking everything. You're risking finishing the race. You're risking taking out a 7-time world champion. You're risking the wrath of all of the Ferrari fans in Australia, all 4 of them, and
say Piastri doesn't leave China if that happens.
Yes.
So it was.
To be fair, I've met quite a few Ferrari fans in Australia, and they're a lot more level-headed than some that I've met elsewhere. Let's just say.
I'll go to my driver of the day. I teed you up for Norris just so that you wouldn't take mine. Obviously, I wasn't favouring you or pointing you that way. No, I felt compelled when you said about Antonelli. I was like, okay, I'm going to think of someone not Lando Norris. Alex Albon, I think, did really well. Had a very solid race. 5th place, I think, after the review. Yeah, he was promoted to 4th and then demoted back to 5th. So, Alex Albon, very clean weekend. That Williams is back where we want it to be. And yeah, didn't put a foot wrong, I don't think so.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah, a good
Excellent.
driver. I think it'll be interesting if we have a dry race in China and we have no retirements for any sort of things. You know, we've obviously had 14 cars finish this race, but it'll be interesting to see if we have a full field and see if we can get a bit of a pecking order from that. I always find that maybe you don't really get an idea until sort of 3 or 4 races in, where it's kind of starting to look. But yeah, we're up there. We're, as a McLaren fan, I'm very happy to start the season, and long may it continue in a similar vein.
Absolutely excellent. Yes, and it's a sprint weekend as well, so just something else to throw into the mix straight away early on in the calendar. Second race, sprint race. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I think we've kept it to a nice round half an hour, that review, nice and concise. Andy, thank you very much for joining me and wrapping up all things about the Australian Grand Prix. I'm sure we'll have you back on. You agreed with everything I said, which is perfect. That you knew the right cues to follow and teed it up nicely. So yeah, we'll get you back on. You mentioned we spoke about, you did a bit of tech assistance over Christmas, got me onto Apple Podcasts, and during that phone call you mentioned DTM. So I'm sure at some point we're going to cover DTM, and I'm going to grab you back on for that and get you talking about DTM, if that's okay, at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you do that. Yeah, it's certainly, you know, something that I've watched in the past and stuff like that. And British touring cars would be good as well. Maybe we could have a touring cars episode and we can talk about DTM, Super V8s, and BTCC as well.
Touring cars is definitely on the list. I've got big plans for touring cars, but I can't say any more just yet. But I'm working on that, hopefully. So yes, we'll definitely cover that. But for now, Andy, thank you very much for joining me.
No problem. Enjoyed it.
Excellent. That's what we want to hear. That's the main thing. And I hope that you listening at home have enjoyed it as well. This has been the Motorsport Review, the Australian Grand Prix. We'll join you next week for the Chinese Grand Prix. Thank you very much. Goodbye.